this section, I want to talk about the discrepancy in analytics data with Google. This can relate to both regular data and conversion data, which I want to discuss in detail. The first reason that can cause a discrepancy in your data between Google Analytics and Google Ads is that your Google Ads might not be linked to your analytics. A related point to this is that you must make sure your auto tagging is enabled. If your auto tagging is not active, the data will go into your organic traffic, which will artificially inflate your organic metrics. Then, when I notice the discrepancy, I look and realize, hey, my search console is showing traffic I never received, and I have this unusually high amount of traffic. The second issue I need to tell you about is that you might have linked the wrong Google Ads account to the wrong Google Analytics account. As a result, the correct data is not being passed, and this problem will cause issues for you when this situation arises. For example, when you mistakenly link a wrong Google Ads account to Google Analytics is pulling data from somewhere else and is showing sessions. Then, when you check the Google Ads acquisition section, you see that nothing is showing up, and you wonder why your campaigns aren't displaying anything. No? The reason is that it's going to a different URL. The next issue that sometimes arises is when you connect several Google Ads accounts to a single Google Analytics account. Another very important point is that, guys, the definition of click attribution differs from one another. There might be 5 clicks. For example, someone clicked, went back, clicked again, went in, and still hasn't started a new session. This practically causes you to see this discrepancy. There is definitely a difference between sessions and clicks, and the reasonable range is said to be a 20% difference. So for example, you see 1,000 clicks, but only 800 sessions. You have initiated sessions, and here their difference is approximately 20%. I'm giving you an approximate figure, and ultimately, as I mentioned, a user might come and click several times on a single item. In fact, the number is being hit. It goes inside, hits back, for example, it goes to a site, and practically no change happens in those 3 sessions. Sometimes the concern is that the person might have a problem with their hand constantly clicking and wanting to click on the number E. Google has addressed this issue, discussing how it detects these repeated clicks, and Google credits this refund back to your account. The next point is, if you remember, exactly in the same discussion about the invalid click, which I will show you on the dashboard right now. Write it down, guys. You only see this invalid click at the campaign level, meaning the all campaigns must be up. And finally, look at your campaign table. Pay attention to which side the search keywords of an ad group are on. I go to the all campaigns level. When they are looking at the campaigns, guys, we have a single column here named, this is the click-through rate column. You see this column is the click-through rate. Look, in the store, it has detected 2,000 clicks, and it refunds the money to your account. When you go to your summary, you see that it has been refunded. In the training, we have 148 clicks in total, and you had 3,000 clicks. And it refunds the money to your account. Now, the point is, guys, these clicks sometimes, the IP changes, it creates a session. Well, Google detects this and removes your clicks. If you have a large discrepancy, the first place to check is the timing of your clicks. See if your analytics are correct at all. Sometimes, the next issue is that your analytics tag is not even there. Remove it because it can't count. Well, this is another reason you need to be aware of. If your analytics tag is not there, it can't count. Or like the time, when I am recording this video for you now, another thing that happens is that Google, from the service, when the click is added, redirects to a service called Google, and then it goes to your site to count it. When this was filtered, until a few days ago, it couldn't count your click, and the user couldn't access the site either. Right, neither your click nor this happens, but this doesn't create a discrepancy for you. Now look at what I'm saying. I just mentioned this so you have it in mind as a reminder. Whenever you watch the video, I hope you have a very good moment. And the next point is, kids, in this discrepancy, Sometimes it happens that the Google Analytics tracking code, this is not properly placed on the site. When this happens, your tracking menu doesn't work correctly. Regarding this, let me tell you a bit about the clicker. When the clicker actually starts a session, it sees this. It doesn't matter to the one who keeps clicking and going back and forth. It might even be identified as a robot, and this robotic behavior causes those who are constantly searching to trouble themselves. They say, we search ourselves, we try, we push, we try. This constant search behavior firstly has a negative impact on their CTR because they don't click. The next point is that even this robotic behavior might be detected and it might not be shown anymore. The next point is that if, for example, it clicks on the others as well, it sees this as robotic because it observes the general behavior and many other parameters. I don't care about that. When this happens, it detects it as robotic, removes the clicks, and it's in Google. Well, sometimes it gives clicks, and suddenly the clicks increase. And before me, the clicks also dropped. Yeah? We can remove it randomly. But sometimes it happens that it always throws different ones. Or it comes with different keyboards and starts working on it. For example, a competitor clicks on it. Well, it also throws a session working on it with different models, and this session has fallen on the other side. But on this side, the click has been removed. You see a big difference here. You should be suspicious of this difference. It makes you realize that something is happening in the middle. Happens. And the next point to note is that it first throws the clicks, then realizes it and removes it, and returns the money. Well, this removal sometimes might even require you to email them when you receive it. So you understand that this fake, for example, for your 3 entries, you realize that this, you send an email, it checks and returns to you, but it also automatically checks these issues and actually has extremely strong fraud detection. It is forming these and removing them. For example, if 3 cities have fallen, practically you have a discrepancy here. Well, the next point is that sometimes, guys, this problem arises more often when you have multiple Google Analytics on your landing pages. This discrepancy mistakenly occurs for you. And when you have 2 analytics, for example, how does it happen? You came and passed it with Tag Manager, the analytics on your site, and then you manually place the code once as well. It counts twice. Well, it counts this twice, and sometimes now this data becomes jumbled and causes conflicts for you. So placing it multiple times is problematic. The next point is that sometimes in your analytics view, you filter some entries. In the analytics view, meaning here, you need to go to the back end of analytics to see this. Well, you come here and apply a filter. We may no longer see the data. If you filter it here, you won't see it anymore. Apply a filter and you won't see it anymore. And the next point is that sometimes you apply a wrong filter and you don't see a part of your data. For example, you exclude a part of the data and it's not there. The next thing is if you haven't activated auto tagging and you manually set some UTM parameters and set them incorrectly, or if you remember those URL options I mentioned not to touch. You mistakenly set 33,000 in it instead of defining the final URL. You set it in the URL options, which is a big mistake. You made changes without knowing what they were and implemented them. This isn't part of this class discussion, but it might be talked about elsewhere. I want to tell you that when you make that mistake, if it happens with an error that confirms your data and the ancient name is written in a language like cuneiform, the ancient name understands it, but your data cannot read where it came from. And it causes data discrepancies for you as well. Another point is that sometimes we fall off the other side of the spectrum. You activate your auto tagging and then manually set your URL or URL parameters incorrectly, which leads to a conflict. Well, but it creates a conflict because your auto tagging might, for example, set the source as UTM source equals something like Google, or the medium equals CPC in your URL. Meanwhile, you manually set something else, which causes a conflict. Then it gets confused about which one to take, and this conflict arises, leading to mistakes for you. The next point is when you have auto tagging enabled, it adds a gclid code at the end of your URL. For example, look here, I just clicked on a link and you can see this query at the top. The question mark becomes a query. GCLead equals something. GCLead stands for Google Click ID, which assigns an ID to it. Based on this, it passes some data to Google. We might not want to delve into this data right now, but the point is, when this happens, it identifies your input to Dear Google, which at the end of this, when we go to see considering this GCLED, it is currently active. Well, given this GCLED, it is processing the data and passing it along. What happens is that some people bookmark it, and when they come back to it, the data gets mixed up again. It means it's saying my input is from Google, but Google is from, you don't have a cliff. It rarely happens in a small number of cases, you don't understand it. But still, it is one of the parameters. And another thing that happens alongside these is that sometimes you are actually talking about conversion tracking. The first thing I need to tell you is that their attribution models differ between Google Analytics and Google Ads. That is, you have an attribution model and Google Analytics says, sir, its default is this. There is the possibility of comparing these in Analytics as well, but it says, sir, you don't have another one. It comes and says, I consider the last clicker. If it's an automation, I said Google is self-centered. Who did it give the conversion to? It said, sir, I hit the conversion. Sir, it was organic, you say, I hit the conversion. But what does Analytics consider? It considers the organic one. For example, imagine 10 Google searches have been done and then they went from their Instagram, for instance, and Nikki has come in and hit the conversion. What does Analytics say? It says this was a social media action, right? But what does Google say? It says, I also have the conversion, it's mine too. It doesn't even say I have it too. It says, sir, the conversion is mine. Now, tell me to whom I should attribute this conversion. It doesn't talk about the others, so these attribution models differ from each other. And another very important point about conversion, if you remember, I said in the conversion window, the conversion that is recorded here in Analytics is being firmly held on the same day. But what does Google do? It passes it. Therefore, the data you are looking at here cannot be compared with the Analytics data. Don't make this comparison. I mentioned that in Analytics, it comes to assess your different channels and you compare them. And of course, in the section on assisted conversions, you should go and review them because you need to see the paths of your goals. But in Google Ads, you say, look, I don't consider the others and the conversion is mine. In this conversion window, I am seeing ad interactions. I say, just tell me to set this up based on that. It only comes. And we focus on Google Ads for optimizing Google Ads. Conversion tracking is for optimizing your Google Ads, not for example, saying to use it for analytics optimization. No. Right now, I'm not concerned with that. Over there, it's used for channel comparison and overall optimization, but here it's used for optimizing Google itself. Conversion tracking, which I talked about in its settings discussion. And this difference is the first topic of conversion and goal differences in Google Ads and Analytics. I mentioned the first one, and automation can form it. Well, in general, actually. The conversion rate is also calculated differently from Google's because of this issue. Over there, it's based on sessions, making comparisons and calculations, while here it's based on clicks, dividing conversions by clicks, and over there it's calculated based on sessions. The counting is different. Why? It reaches the point where interaction occurred, but Analytics says, sir, this was said from a specific place, this is for social, it doesn't concern you. It's true. You had an impact, it assists your conversion, but at the point where it's counting your goal, it says, sir, this goal is for a specific channel. Well, and this happens. The next point is that sometimes we have invalid ad clicks and invalid conversions in Google. It might happen that someone comes in and even clicks the button. But when it's an invalid click, well, Analytics counts it as a goal. For example, what did I say? It might be like this. Someone starts searching for different words and comes in. Your website records a session But Google itself detects this repetitive behavior and says, hey, this is a bot, and removes the invalid click. So the click is removed. But analytics says, I recorded the session. The poor guy came and even clicked. To confuse the issue, it might say, hey, I'm natural, right? It tries to act naturally and clicks on a button, for example. Not to purchase, but just clicks on a button. It says, for example, I made a call, in the sense that I clicked the call button. Here, this is also counted as an invalid conversion from Google's side, but analytics says, hey, I recorded the session or tried and even marked a conversion. I have nothing to do with it. I told you the conversion data. And the next point is that still, the conversion data is fresh, and you can't fix it, but in Google Analytics it says, oh, I got this for such and such a thing. The next point I want to add to these is that, guys, your account's time zone here might be set to Turkey, but the time zone of your view, which you see in your view settings, might be somewhere else. I usually set these back to Turkey again. For example, if you set the time to the US, but your analytics numbers are set to Turkey, this creates a problem because your data won't match up. This conflict might happen again, causing issues for you. That's why many of you say, hey, I'm seeing real-time data in analytics, but why isn't it syncing here? It didn't get set to 100 and now I don't have the data. Except for this, guys. There is still a delay. Analytics might not have finalized this yet. This means the data was available, but analytics hasn't processed it. And Google Ads has recorded the click, but the data hasn't synced yet. This syncing is a very important matter. The next point I want to tell you guys is that sometimes it happens that you're not paying attention. And you've gone and registered a call event button, thinking it's giving a conversion. You look at Google Analytics, check the events section, and you see that in the events section, but if you had gone and checked the goal and set it as a goal, naturally, it would have been a goal, and then you look and see it as an event. It is being reviewed, and you wonder why you're not getting the conversion or there's no conversion at all. This problem also arises. Let me tell you something about setting up conversions. Sometimes delays occur when you want to import those conversions. Remember, we imported them. It might be that the data, in fact, when importing it, you hit all of Iran, and the data hasn't been imported yet. There might be a small delay that occurs, and after some time, you might see it if you notice. It's not a goal, it was in your comments section. I mentioned here that I would bring it from the channel. I said in the middle of this video to tell you, you wanted to import it, and you would say, for example, choose this thing out, and your goal might be that it should happen later. Don't stress about it. Just be aware and refresh. For instance, we went there, the goal was set, and they didn't refresh. So I talked about this topic as well, about this. The difference in conversion and session differences. Sometimes you're not aware of it. I said, but to check that parameter, guys, auto-trigger all these things and fix them. This has nothing to do with the past. It has nothing to do with the past. Now you've set it, or the previous record won't be corrected anymore. The previous ones are done. You've recorded the data. Everything from here on becomes important, especially for some of you. I have this fill. They're not aware that I told you. They apply view filters, they say exclude, and they exclude the ground or CPC. Why? Because they wanted to remove, for example, their binary or exclude CPC. Google doesn't see it either. This is something that is also discussed in the filter. Let me tell you something right here, guys. There's an occurrence that happens here, and it's quite common among those who are making purchases. Well, for those who are making purchases, when it goes to the gateway or the banking portal and comes back, you have a section here called the referral exclusion list. If you don't exclude this, for those gateways that, you see guys, these are the gateways. If you don't exclude these domains, Google Analytics will register your goal as coming from, for example, Shaparak. I know it came from Shaparak, but the point is that the path was like this. It came to this point, went to Shaparak, returned to my site, and the goal was completed. but it attributes this to what? When you go into the referral exclusion in the tracking info and remove these domains, something happens, guys. Here, it tries to determine who the goal belongs to. First of all, your domain is always the default here. Why? Because if you move from one page to another and haven't excluded this, it will say who scored the goal, your own domain. Well, but when you exclude it, it says this is nothing, exclude, exclude, exclude. If it sees a domain here, for example, coming from Google, it can attribute it to that. But if, for instance, you haven't excluded Shaparak, this is what I'm showing you. If you haven't excluded it, it comes here. It attributes it to, for example, that Shaparak gateway, to. And what happens? You don't see the previous one that was the cause, right? Or to. But when you exclude this, right, what does it say? It comes and says, reaching this referral domain is nothing. This is excluded, Chan. It's as if I don't see it. I attribute it to the previous domain, your own domain, reaching the UTM, for example, source, medium, Google, CPC. I attribute this to Google. When you don't do this, your purchase gets attributed to that gateway. Be careful. You need to set referral exclusion for this, and it will reduce your errors. Another point is that a discrepancy might occur, guys. This happens with a low number of clicks. Well, where you have call extensions and the number of clicks is low, this issue arises. And you see that the number of calls is not significant compared to the number of clicks you have. For example, let's assume we had 100 clicks and you made 50 calls. Well, how did you make them? Either from the website or from the call extension. Right, Mom? This happens with call extensions. When a click occurs, you are counting the click. Oh, correct. But this session doesn't get recorded. No. With low numbers, you see this discrepancy occurring. Be aware that with large numbers, it doesn't stand out as much. Call extensions do stand out. But when the volume becomes so large, the call extensions might not be clicked as much. So the discrepancy gets lost. However, with a low number of clicks, the call extension is clicked. The session wasn't recorded, so keep in mind that such a thing might happen which could cause a discrepancy in your session tracking to become apparent and catch your attention. Be mindful of this issue. I talked about the discrepancies between the data from analytics and Google in some parts, and I think it's important for you to consider this, guys, because these can create differences after their attribution. Sometimes you might see discrepancies in click sessions, and if you place the analytics code incorrectly, whether in Tag Manager or manually, make sure to check and correct these. Make sure auto-tagging is enabled. If auto-tagging is active, do not manually add UTM parameters to the URL. Please avoid manually adding URL options, as this can cause conflicts. In this situation, if you use both auto-tagging and UTM parameters, it will still create conflicts. Also, don't forget about the word clicks. It might be that the word click has been cast, but you have attributed the session to such models, or vice versa. It might be that you've received a click with the same keyword, and the session shows that the same person has returned and clicked on it again. But in reality, a new session is not created. Therefore, this discrepancy is logical in some cases. A discrepancy of up to 25% is acceptable and does not cause any issues for you. Up to this point, and regarding other matters I mentioned about conversion, tightening the conversion day is very important, more important than anything else. Google's selfishness is even more important because it doesn't consider others at all. It only considers itself. It's analytics, but when I'm looking at last click, I have the correct assist, but I'm looking at last click, and this person has caused the conversion, and I attribute the goal, Khan, to that. Where in analytics can you address this issue in your analytics? The data intentionally differs from each other. The next point, which is also very simple, guys, besides the time zones that might have a constant, besides the filter I mentioned that you might have applied in the view, also consider this. Sometimes we give this filter a lot of importance here. I'm not saying it's not natural, but pay close attention to it. You're looking at the date range here, you're looking at the analytics here, and while this is again a clear difference, well, that is very simple, but you might actually make a mistake and have a problem. Besides that, you might have applied a filter in Google, for example. I went and paused it, apply the filter and I say, hey man, I want to see the conversion in this view, but you're seeing the conversion in another view. And if the conversion goal is set to be open and go, it understands. Even this itself might cause a discrepancy. Even click position causes a discrepancy because a campaign ad group or keyword that you paused, you no longer see its data in your report here because you filtered it yourself. When in analytics, it has recorded something when you are seeing it. There's another discrepancy that hits you. This is also very simple. Focus on the main topics. This is related to the discrepancy in click position. Yes, conversion data in analytics with Google itself, which are completely different in approach, ClickStation that is app-based, and other matters that I mentioned. I'll show you in the next video.